I am Kelly Kafel, a Senior Deputy District Attorney at the Shasta County DA's office, and I work primarily homicide cases. My partner in that process for a number of years was Detective Rusty Bishop with the Reading Police Department. We started picking up cold cases together in 2017, 2018. Ultimately worked 3 of those cases in that period together, along with other homicides. I think for sure it has been the quality of the initial work that was done by the Reading Police Department. In each of the cases that we were able to file, we would go back and look at all the evidence that had been collected over the years. And the quality of that preservation, I think, is one of the sole reasons we've been able to be successful. And that was a unique one. The way that came to life was unique in that one of the 3 co-defendants walked into KRCR, decided that he wanted to make amends and tell the world what he had participated in.
I'm going to turn myself in next door at the Sheriff's Department for a crime I was involved in years ago, and somebody lost their life. It was murder.
That was in 2018 that he showed up, and that's when Rusty got involved, and that's when I got involved.
I grabbed my partner, Rob Garnero, at the time, and we drove over to the sheriff's office. And I remember pulling into the sheriff's office parking lot, and there's this guy standing there, and I'm assuming it's Brian Hawkin. He's talking to a sheriff's office detective at the time. We went over and introduced ourselves and talked to him briefly and asked if he was willing to come back and speak to us about the case. He agreed. He was pretty much, for the most part, a fairly open book during that first interview. I've never experienced anything like that in my career, so it was very interesting.
Correct. One of the things that the news station agreed to hold the story for a short period of time so that law enforcement could locate the other 2 people that were involved in the homicide. And within 12 hours of Brian Hawkins having disclosed the murder, Reading Police Department were able to find the 2 other participants in Red Bluff, brother and sister, the Culvers. They ultimately came in and gave interviews to the police department. Curtis Culver confessed to Rob Garnero, and Shauna Culver did not confess, but ultimately did come back in through the court process and acknowledge her responsibility in that case as well. Ultimately, Brian Hawkins pled to first-degree murder for life in prison. He'll be eligible for parole in 25 years. And both of the Culvers both pled guilty and were sentenced. Frank McAllister was a 19-year-old kid from Reading. He was engaged at the time that he went missing. He'd had a little bit of trouble in his youth, nothing too drastic, but he's just like any other kid you'd see in Reading, normal guy. Yeah. People describe him as someone who was super helpful, who would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. But by the time we got in the case, it had already been cold for 25 years, so it was hard to find people who still had fresh memories of Frank. Detective Bishop went through the entire file again and realized that there had been a piece of evidence that could have been tested that hadn't been tested. And that's in one of our more important cold cases against James Watkins. And Rusty was on light duty, so he was going through an old file and found that the victim's fingernails, the scrapings under her fingernails, had not been able to be analyzed because it had a combination of DNA. And when the murder occurred, there was no way to be able to differentiate those 2 multiple contributors, and now there is. they were able to find the DNA of a perpetrator that had murdered and raped our victim 25 years ago based on Rusty going through that file is amazing.
We had to go to Texas to interview James Watkins, who was in custody down there. And we started doing homework to figure out where our victim's family lived. We found out her daughter lived in Texas.
Rusty and I and two of the detectives got to go sit at a picnic table with her and tell her that we had a hit for the first time in years and years and years. Her face lit up. All of us were kind of silent at the significance of that moment. That for me was a big deal. To be able to tell someone that, it's just what an incredible feeling, and be able to be part of that. Just the elation and just the happiness and closure that they got. It was